Good afternoon and welcome to Fifth Stone, an interview series started by the Chennai Center for China Studies with experts that discuss on contemporary developments that happen in India and India's neighborhood affecting India's security interest, including as a part of deciphering China. Today, we have with us Sri Pratap Heblikar sir, Managing Trustee, Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, and former Special Secretary, Government of India. This is Bala Subramanian C, Research Officer, C3S. To give you a brief background, China has demonstrated an increasing profile in South Asia, given its geo-economic, geopolitical, and security profile across the region. China initiated the Belt and Road Initiative, which includes Silk Road Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. Some of the key projects in the same are China-Pakistan Occupied Kashmir Economic Corridor and China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. China also has extensive deep pocket presence in South Asian countries, including economic investments and defense and security cooperation across Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Nepal. As India's gateway to Southeast Asia, Myanmar weighs high on New Delhi's strategic calculus, especially following the military coup on Feb 1st, 2021. Its return to military rule has forced mandarins in New Delhi back to the drawing board. On one hand, India has invested heavily in Myanmar, due to which it cannot afford to directly antagonize the junta as to not endanger or ceding the strategic space completely to China. At the same time, given its democratic credential, India is in a position of rethinking and giving its unequivocal backing to military rule. Now, with Myanmar under military rule, it will be more difficult, at least for the foreseeable future, for New Delhi to maintain a healthy military to military relationship with Myanmar, as this may pose international reaction. The US President Joe Biden has to impose sanctions on Myanmar, which would have a spillover effect on Japanese investments, which complement India's projects. The global response to the coup will also have an impact on India's interest in Myanmar. To deal with such eventualities, India's strategic option should now appear firmer than ever. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation and for making this interview and taking your time out to be with us. So, to start with, sir, considering your experience with Myanmar, the Myanmar democratic transition been a work in progress since its experiment with a hybrid model of democracy in 2011. In this scenario, can you please explain what has led to the coup in Myanmar, sir?
Bala, let me at the outset thank you for this opportunity to speak on a subject which is of considerable importance to India in both in the political, strategic, economic, and cultural sense. Having said this, if you look around India, India's immediate neighborhood, India's bilateral fundamentals with its immediate neighbors is very strong. And these have been formalized by a number of treaty relationships, agreements we have with them, right from Maldives, Singapore, Bangladesh, Myanmar. Then to the north, we have Bhutan and Nepal. What we need to bear in mind is that the thinking in these countries have also changed over the years, especially in the last several years. These countries have now come to see India more as an opportunity than as a threat. The threat conception was in their minds at that point of time when there were regimes in these countries that were opposed to India. And India had been repeatedly telling these countries that if India's security was threatened by any in the neighborhood, India would certainly like to ensure that its interests are protected, and for which it had several leverages. So, India today has a very strong relationship with its neighbors, come what may be said otherwise. And I think there is no withdrawing from the fact that these relationships are bound to grow. A country of 1.3 billion is a country which affords opportunity for these countries to look at India as a development partner, not as an irritant or a threat. Okay, so that is something that forms the background to what we could discuss today, and hopefully create a picture which is positive, balanced, and is not very alarmistic in nature. Now, to come to your question, also what happened in Myanmar on the 1st of February 2021. It has been a culmination of events that began much earlier. The deficit trust that existed between the military and the civilian leadership has come to the fore, and it has become one of the governing aspects for the coup. Ever since 1988-1990, when the Burma Socialist Program Party collapsed in 1988 after 26 years of rule, the country saw a period of turmoil, which ended in 1990 when the elections were held. At that point of time, the popularity of the National League for Democracy under Aung San Suu Kyi was very strong because she had the majority of parliament on her side. There was no opposition to the NLD at that point of time, and the military and its candidates were worsted in the electoral field. But the military still did not want to go back to the barracks, as it felt perhaps that a civilian government would seek accountability and would seek the reduction in the military's role in national life. After having tasted power for 26 years, I think the military was reluctant to go back to the barracks. Yes, the military had genuine concerns that the military was there to ensure that the territorial integrity of Myanmar did not disintegrate because of problems between the ethnic minority groups and the major groups. The military took upon itself as the custodian of Myanmar's territorial integrity. That's why it continued to hang on to the levers of power. So between 1990, when the parliament elections were over, NLD came to power, it was not permitted to take office. As a result, right from 1990 to 2010 or 2011, when General Thein Sein became president and inaugurated what would be a quasi civilian rule. So Myanmar had been ruled by the military for 21 odd years. First, it was the State Law and Order Restoration Council, followed by the State Peace and Development Council. So it was only towards the first, so right from 1990 to 2011 or 2005, 2006, there was no semblance of political activity of the kind that we would have visualized or envisaged. It didn't take place. And during most of this period, Aung San Suu Kyi was behind bars, or she was incarcerated by the military for one reason or the other. There are three things that we need to say: that she was extremely popular. She came from a background, her father's what's really called the modern Mahatma of Myanmar. And she was the auditor and accountant general of all activities that the military was undertaking. So the military had some kind of a reverence. She had a halo about herself. But yes, so during this period, the military continued to be in office. The military brought about certain, far-reaching developments, which I will come to a little later. And in 2000, early 2000s, the younger generation of the military officers decided that time had come, that Chinese influence in Myanmar had become larger than life. They wanted to diversify Myanmar. They wanted to look at other areas of synergies with friendly countries where India was on the top. And lastly, to create its own path towards democracy. I think there's what led to the ouster of the Nevin's influence in 2002. When Nevin's family was arrested. Incidentally, the gentleman who is now the acting president of Myanmar or acting head of state, was the man who was responsible for the arrest of the Nevin family. And in 2004 to 2008, a series of developments took place which strengthened the move towards democracy or towards reducing military role or China's actions in Myanmar. So in 2008, Senior General Than Shwe made way and handed over the reins of the military to Senior General Min Aung. And in 2008, the new constitution, the military-led constitution, was brought into play. And in 2010, the elections were held, and General Thein Sein was the first civilian head of government in Myanmar, so to say. So that being the development, the thrust is that there was always, if you look at the election results of 1990 or in 2010 or 2015, in 2010, NLD did not contest the elections. But in 2011 and 2010 and 2015, when NLD contested the elections, you know the results were overwhelmingly in the NLD's favor. And an NLD which was led by Aung San Suu Kyi herself, and it left very little of the canvas for other parties to participate. So I think the country is yearning for a move towards democracy, and a major part of the military. Today I think the Myanmar army is about in excess of 500,000 people. I think a majority of them have voted for the pro-democracy or multi-party system. So there is this feeling in the length and breadth of the country as democracy is something they all wish for. So, but however, that is how it happened. And I think right from the time when Aung San Suu Kyi became the virtual head of government, and there have been instances where she has not seen eye to eye with the government, because the military always felt that she would be so overarching that the military might be eclipsed in the seat of power. So they wanted to ensure that there is an insurance against such thing happening. That is why 25% of the seats in parliament were reserved for the military. And the military also went into elections with its political party, that the Union Solidarity and Development Party, which is its party. So both the elections have proved that neither the party nor the military has been found electorally conducive to the people. But in the last 5 years, the relationship between the two sides, the military as well as the civilian leadership, had reached a point of no return. Right from last year, sometime people say in August, there have been calls for stringent action against the NLD government, and this general it appears, been warning the NLD that it had to mend its ways, or otherwise there would be problems ahead. But at the time of elections, and before the elections and after the elections, the senior general has gone on record saying that he had doubts about the way the election was going to be conducted or had been conducted, and he had warned that action will be taken if his apprehensions were found correct. And I think on the 1st of February, it was proved that the military was not permitting the civilian parliament to be, brought into house, because it should have negated the military's criticism and assertions that it was a fraudulent election. Had they permitted NLD MPs to take oath, it would have said that the military would have had egg on its face, so to say, that despite its allegations of a fraudulent election, it had permitted the government to be formed. She would have members would have taken oath in the parliament, and by the first week of March, a new government would be in place, and she would have selected her cabinet of ministers. So there were a lot of predilections and misapprehensions in the minds of the military as to what she would do in her second term in office. I think that's where the rub was, and I think everybody's apprehensions proved correct, that on the 1st of January, the military was back in power.
Thank you, sir. You have beautifully set the stage and set the ball rolling. You mentioned two significant points. One was about the 1990s, and second about the Chinese presence in Myanmar. So this makes me to pose another question, because since the 1990, China was possibly the only country that was supporting Myanmar through its international isolation until 2011. So in a way, Myanmar also needed Beijing to shield it at the United Nations Security Council and so as to defy the international sanctions. However, this also proved to be a double-edged sword of sorts for Myanmar, as the military became deeply mistrustful of the over-dependence or reliance on China. So did this actually prompt the democratic reforms in 2011, sir?
As far as Chinese influence in Myanmar goes, China has always, as you know, looked to getting access to the warmer waters of the Indian Ocean, as it is now doing through Pakistan, what we used to call as the multimodal communication corridor between Xinjiang and Gwadar. It wanted to get into the Arabian Sea. It wants to use the shortcut through Myanmar. We call it the Irrawaddy transit route, starting from the Kachin state, emptying down into Shokpur in the Bay of Bengal. So that China has always dreamt of creating more opportunities for it, not to depend solely on the South China Seas, because it understood the dilemma that existed in South China Seas or in the Malacca Straits. So it wanted to look at other alternative areas where it could enter into the Indian Ocean through either Pakistan or Myanmar, or trying to create new ways, new communications systems coming to Nepal, or going from China, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Vietnam, going towards the other side. It wanted access to the Indian Ocean in a many different way. So the second point, which is important, is that in the late 80s, suddenly the Communist Party of China began to reassess its relationship with some of the fraternal communist parties in the region. China had already burnt its boats with the Communist Party of Vietnam in 1979, with the attempt to punish Vietnam, where it got a bloody nose. So here, when Deng Xiaoping began his process of modernization, he wanted to develop the poorer regions of the country, and Yunnan province was one of them. How would he develop Yunnan province? Was to link it to the markets in Myanmar, and link the markets in Myanmar through a north-south highway or waterway, which would empty itself into the Bay of Bengal. So goods would come from Yunnan province to Kachin state, not very far from where this Midstone Dam is, and by specially created boats, it would come down north to south and empty itself into the Bay of Bengal at Chokview. So that was the plan. So 1988, the Chinese began to push the Communist Party of Burma to make peace with the authorities. As a result, the Communist Party of Burma leadership was given an ultimatum: either it made peace, or it would feel the wrath of the Chinese authorities. So some of them made peace and settled down in the border of Yunnan province with Myanmar, and the others, decided to remain where they were. So 16 armed groups in Myanmar exchanged, as I say, arms for peace. They were allowed to keep their weapons, but they were told that they would not wage war against the Myanmar government. Why? China wanted to keep this corridor safe from ethnic conflict with the Burmese army, because it wanted to create the corridor. So right from 1988 till now, 1988 to 2005, 2006, this corridor was in the making. The progress had been very slow, because it had to go through areas which had been under the control of ethnic armed organizations which were opposed to the military or the Rangoon people. So the Chinese had to bring in their influence to bear on these groups so that they could, progress their that transit corridor. So whatever has been the Chinese investment in Myanmar should be seen in this direction. So the investments they have made in the transportation corridor have been enormous. And being what they are, very strategically thinking, smart ways of thinking, they kept the army on the right hand side and they also cultivated the political parties, particularly the NLD. Every time there was a flare up in Myanmar during the late 90s, the Chinese would invariably send a high ranking official, an official of the rank of a state councillor to Myanmar, as a guiding thing. Don't blow things out of proportion. Manage things within yourself so that you don't attract greater international attention to yourselves. Because after that horrendous 1988-90 period, the international community had virtually slapped sanctions on Myanmar. So it had to depend on what it was going to get from Myanmar, from China, or from North Korea, or some of his allies elsewhere. So that's where it began in 1988, 1990. It is popularly called as China's Look South policy. I don't call it the China-Myanmar economic corridor. I don't want to, give it a name or give a respectability to that thing. It is what I call as the Irrawaddy transit route. And at that time, this transit route, if it had come about, China was looking at $400 to $500 million to be given to Myanmar as what we would say is a royalty. So that's how the whole thing started. So when the BRI came about, what was a slow offline project came into prominence, and it became part of the BRI. So that's how Chinese have helped to build airports, they have helped to build railway communication, they have helped to build waterways. All this is because of the direction that they wanted to move into the Bay of Bengal and then onto the Indian Ocean. And they utilized everything in their control to ensure that their investments, their strategic interests in Myanmar remain protected at all times. And one of the biggest advantages they had was to use the veto in the United Nations Security Council whenever there was a motion against Myanmar moved by some of the members. So that has always been a thing which the Burmese have, the Myanmar government has understood that yes, behind their back they have China and none else can actually take on Myanmar despite whatever it does. I think that's what we need to note. So that's where the transit route history is, and that's how it's going to develop. I don't think it's going to be an easy thing because whether it empties into the Irrawaddy River near Rangoon or it goes down to Shokwe, we don't know. But you have to have a lot of investments when it's coming through from the plains into the hills, into the Rakhine state. There's a lot of activity that's going to take place in the next couple of years.
Thank you, sir. Looking at all these observations, now we can say that China is placed in a very unique position with regard to the coup, because it says that its general policy is that it doesn't interfere in the internal matters of any country. Because this approach, as you mentioned also, this approach has always allowed China to work with the dictators as well as democracies alike. How do you look at this development, sir?
You see, given the kind of position they were there in the late 80s and in the 90s, they had a good run of the mill. They had a good run of the place. The military was well disposed towards them. In fact, some of the very senior generals were more pro-China than anybody else. But one thing is to be noted that while the Myanmar military depended on the Chinese, they also were very, very conscious of the fact that their own national interests had to be kept in mind at all times. So there were red lines which neither side crossed, but I think that was important to know that they would not be, the Chinese would not get away with whatever they wanted to do. But yes, to why we came to this position where Chinese gained preeminence in Myanmar is because of the 1988-1990 episode. Sanctions were so severe, and the Western countries, moved away from Myanmar because Myanmar became a pariah state, and at the same time, following the Kissinger effect, most of the Western countries now saw China as a major investment destination. And they had no qualms about punishing a weak, smaller country vis-a-vis China. Because if you look at Myanmar's democratic credentials, it has had elections, it has a constitution, it has elections. It returned people to the parliament. Yes, there have been human rights abuses, aberrations, and things like this, drugs. But who is the biggest? If you look in today's terms, China is the biggest culprit. And China was not punished at that point of time because the Western world wanted to intervene to invest in that country. Even if we had invested 20% of that money in Myanmar, we wouldn't be seeing problems today. I think there was a certain amount of myopia. Most of the countries carried a colonial baggage, sanction penalties and things like that. It doesn't work. And to be fair to India, even though India being Myanmar's neighbor, always wanted that there should be peace and stability in that country, because any breakup of Myanmar would have impacted us in a major way. And we did not want any other kind of dispensation sitting in Yangon, which would not be, which could have been hostile to India. So that is what India was looking at. And I must tell you this, I think it was in 1997 when when the US under President Clinton announced sanctions against Myanmar. Later that year, India organized a huge exhibition in Rangoon, an engineering, a trade exhibition, where India announced a $10 million lineup project to Myanmar. Just imagine, in the mid-90s itself, India was struggling. We didn't have the kind of foreign exchanges that we had, strength, but still we gave them a $10 million line of credit. It was a symbolic gesture, but it went on to show that yes, India wanted to ensure that the Burmese have a lot of economic relationship with India, and that we wanted to support them at that point of time. So I think, yes, Chinese influence is strong. Chinese influence has a pervading, effect on the country. There's a lot of happening, but the underlying effect is there are a lot of suspicions about the Chinese among the locals, and that is what we need to keep in mind.
Speaking about India, I would like to draw your attention to a recent development which happened in October 2020, where on a joint visit to Myanmar, our Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringala and our Army Chief General Narvane met with the both State Councillor Suu Kyi as well as General Ming Aung Hlaing, making it clear that New Delhi saw both the relationship at par. So this coup in Myanmar presents a complex mosaic of challenges for India, because on the one hand, India it has invested heavily in Myanmar, but at the same time, it cannot afford to lose space to China. Can you please elaborate more on this?
Okay, let me take you back again in time and in history. Indian support to Myanmar at the time when the insurgents were knocking at the gates of Rangoon is very well known. The government of India gave a lot of military support to the powers that be, and the dangers that were lurking were removed thanks to some of the help which we gave. the situation in the 60s and 70s was not conducive to India at that point of time, because Myanmar was still strong under the socialist regime of then Nevin. It's only that in the mid 80s or mid 90s that we began to realize that we had to do something out of the box to return to a lot of to return to in the shall we say get back into the good books of the Myanmar authorities. And it only started sometime, I think by about 1995, the bilateral relations had become very, they were about, they, they were resuming on the path to better relationship. And we had the Myanmar army cooperating with us on the Indo-Myanmar border opposite Mizoram to apprehend Indian insurgents who had been transporting weapons from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh to North Myanmar. The Myanmar army and the Indian army were together in the joint operations. It is called Operation Bluebird, and our success rates were very high. But suddenly, when the government of India announced the Jawaharlal Nehru Award to Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese stopped all cooperation. So there was a lot of hiatus at that point of time. But I think in 1996, 1997, the relationship began to improve, and that's how it's grown there. While our diplomatic relations with Myanmar uh, had tested us in the entire 2 decades of 1990 and in the first decade of the 21st century, I think our diplomatic missions had to do a lot of hard work to ensure that the relationship, the trust deficit had been addressed, and that we were moving from uh, good to better. But it must also be remembered that the bonhomie between the Indian military and the Myanmar military has been of the highest standards. And that's how the relationship has been growing, and it has grown well. I think there's an incident of some importance that in 1995 or 96, the wives of the senior generals, the senior military officers, had visited Bodh Gaya, where the Indian military virtually laid out the red carpet to them. And I think when they came to Kolkata from Yangon and from there to Bodh Gaya and went back, they virtually got a 5-star treatment. And they understood that the importance of Bodh Gaya in the life of the nations, that they say is a contributor to the restoration of good relations in the country, and it grew from there on. So the Indian military does have a very important role to play in Myanmar. There, since the military in that country and military in India were colleagues in uniform, there was a better understanding between both sides. And when General Naravane went to Myanmar in October last year along with the foreign secretary, it must be remembered that our army chief had served as a defense attaché in Rangoon. And the defense attaché in Rangoon has his own standing with the Myanmar Army, Navy, and Air Force, and it is something that is an important platform for them. And so I think it was something which he was able to bring to the table in his discussions with his counterparts there. But there is a lot of Myanmar army officers come to India for training. There have been Indian officers who have gone to Myanmar to learn the language. So there is a lot of interaction and interplay between both sides. And especially in the last couple of years, we have seen that there has been a lot of change of focus, where we were prepared to train them in India. We were also giving them non-lethal military equipment to use. But in the last couple of years, I think that emphasis has changed. Now the gift of the submarines and some of the military hardware are going from both lethal to non-lethal. I think there is a growing understanding of each other in that particular sphere. The visit of the uh, foreign secretary and the army chief is only the second time it has happened in the past. I'm told that it happened earlier in the case of Bhutan when General Rawat, I'm told, and visited Bhutan along with the foreign secretary. I think that was this is the second incident that happened, but it had its dividends. I think the establishment of a good relationship between both sides was there for people to see, and I think the credit must go to both sides to understand each other. Like they say that Prime Minister's Modi's Act East policy has given India dividends where it counted, and this was a proof of that.
Thank you, sir. Apart from strategic concerns, India has also cultivated several, as you mentioned, infrastructure and development projects with Myanmar, because India sees Myanmar as a gateway to the East and ASEAN countries also. Given India's northeast is inadequately connected and hampered by lack of industrial base, and India's connectivity projects, especially the trilateral highway and the Kaladan multimodal transit transport project, how do you think this will get influenced by the recent developments in Myanmar, sir?
Bala, I think as I see it, there are many other areas where we can play a bigger role in the economic development of Myanmar. For example, these two projects which you mentioned have been in the works for quite some time. They have not shown the kind of alacrity or the speed in which they should have been progressed or processed. There are other areas certainly that need to be taken up. India has a good track record of development assistance to Myanmar, despite the bilateral trade being at the level it is. I think India's development assistance has been satisfactory, and if need be, it can also be ramped up. But there are opportunities galore in Myanmar if only people were to look at, because what do we require today is the government is doing its best. I'm sure the embassy is doing its best. Now you require the private sector in India to step forward and invest there. And I'm writing a paper on some of these areas. I do not want to preempt myself by giving you the details, but once it is done, I will certainly share it with you. But I think there is tremendous synergy that can happen in Myanmar today, and given the kind of things that can be done, India can also look to partnerships with Japan. India can look to partnership with South Korea, and India can look to partnership with other countries, including Taiwan, to invest in Myanmar. And I think it is something that we need to do. Take information technology, take information communication technology universities. And I think the opportunities are enormous. But I don't want to. I want to just say that the government should not become a service provider here. The government should become an enabler. Government should get people to invest there. And once you do that, there is no going back. Then I think investments need to be right from north to south. It is not east to west. We don't want investments. When the Irrawaddy river is going from north to south, we don't want it from the east, from the west bank to the eastern border of India. It has to be all around. There are tremendous opportunities, and there are people who are willing to accept Indian investment there or Indian collaboration. I think you only need to exploit this particular opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
And, you talk about colleges, talk about schools, you talk about one of the biggest and most one of the unifying powers, influences in that country is the Buddhist Sangha. When the Prime Minister went to Sri Lanka last year, he made an announcement of $14 to $15 million towards the development of Sasana. Same thing in Myanmar. Today, I think when the monks are such a revered, respected lot of the country, that is just unbelievable. So there is something that can be done. Cultural tourism, medical tourism, religious tourism, you name it, it is possible. But talking of the Kaladan multimodal project, it has multimodal. Just imagine in Bangladesh, because of the myopia of the politicians, they lost an opportunity of collaborating with India on this. Today, Bangladesh would have not been a power deficient country. They're going to use power for their own power generation units. So I think, like I said, India is now a land of opportunity. People can look at India as a place where they could, hitch their wagon to India for economic development.
Thank you, sir. You have beautifully put the message across where private sector has to take a very larger role to play. Speaking of which, I would like to pose another question to you. What do you think is the socio-political and strategic impact of China's special economic zone in Myanmar, especially the Kiapi port and the CMEC, the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, on India? Because why do you think India is not able to derive such strategic dividends in Myanmar?
Well, like I said, China took advantages that came its way. China began to invest heavily into areas which underwrote its national security interests and objectives. And it did not waver, and it ensured that all of its projects were proceeding in the right direction as per a timeline or as per milestones they had laid down. That's the first one. The second one, the Chinese knew that their investments had to be solid, and the investments would pay them the dividends. Thirdly, China was concerned about what it's doing there. It was pursuing its national interests. So I will not want to say where we went wrong or why we missed the boat and what is it that we should have done or we ought not to have done, because in a country like ours where governments change periodically, while foreign policy has remained more or less constant, what you attach as importance to it is how you want to denote it. So as far as the Irrawaddy transit corridor is concerned, I think it is something that India needs to take note. It does create a certain amount of anxiety in the minds of the security planners and management, because we don't know what would be the agreement or the arrangement between the two sides when the boats start flying from north to south. What are the customs regulations that they will follow? What is it that they will do to India, actually prejudicial to India's interests. So I think at the same time, they started this south-north pipeline to pump gas from which was found in the Bay of Bengal to the Chinese assisted gas fields up to Yunnan, so that they are told not very far from our borders. So whatever happens from the west coast of the Irrawaddy River to our border, where China is involved, is a matter of concern and will remain a matter of concern. And as far as Chokyu Fort is concerned, yes, we don't know how much of revenue generation takes place in that port, because we don't know what kind of traffic the port is capable of handling. And we need to make a realistic assessment as to what is it given in return to both sides, to China and India. But yes, as I always said, and I repeat myself, the Chinese presence in Myanmar is only going to galvanize India's interest. Like what has happened after the 2020 incidents in May, June, when the Chinese attacked us in the Indo-Tibet border in Ladakh, in western Ladakh. In Ladakh, is something that they have given us opportunity to understand our strengths and what are the opportunities for us to, develop our economic power and muscles, the military muscle. And I think we need also to look at Chinese presence in Myanmar. How is it going to help us as an opportunity to, evolve or bring about more economic development or cultural development or political and military relationship. I think that's where we should be invested in time and money, and that's where our security is going to be involved.
Speaking of Myanmar-China equations, to which I would like to draw your attention to, sir. There's an interesting development in July 2020, where the Myanmar Army Chief General accused China of harming the Arakan Army and Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army rebels, who Myanmar considers to be a terrorist organization, which are very active in the Rakhine State, the western Myanmar bordering China. So, how do you view such developments, taking into account Myanmar's equations with China?
Like I mentioned earlier, the military in Myanmar has its own messaging and signaling systems. It has red lines which the Chinese are not permitted to cross. And I think the General Mionle made this statement at an interview when he was in Russia. And it was made to a Russian television station, I think, and where he didn't accuse China by name, but he did imply that the Chinese were interfering in Myanmar's internal affair, and that China had been arming the insurgents in the Rakhine State. So it was sweet music to everybody else. It was something which came in a third country, and especially in Russia. And Russia is heavily invested in Myanmar to understand what China is doing there. So I think it is a message to the Chinese that, look, you need to sit back and ensure that you do not cross this line, and we are capable of handling security by ourselves. But it is generally understood by its intervention in the Rakhine State. The Chinese are trying to buy off the Rohingya Muslims, so that when the Chofu port becomes actually operational with the Irrawaddy corridor landing up there, they don't want to have an insurgency problem on their hands. They don't want to be at the mercy of the insurgents to ensure that their projects or their people or their property is harmed. If the Chinese have done it with the Kachins, they've done it with the Shans, they've done it with the Karens, they're doing with the Rohingyas or the Arakanis, I'm not surprised. But yes, well, the general made a very, very pointed statement. But we would have wished that he would have given us some more evidence of the Chinese interference in the Rakhine State. Yes, the Chinese being in Rakhine State is a matter of concern for us. And I think India would need to ensure that it has more mechanisms in place to monitor and keep these anti-India activities under control.
Speaking of mechanisms, I would like to, just ask you a question on, since we have also dealt about Northeast India, this also probes us to look into India's security, internal security. Can you please elaborate on the traditional and non-traditional security threat emanating from the Golden Triangle, with the threat of increased proliferation of drugs and small arms in the Northeast region of India, because it has a very significant bearing on India's internal security?
The first point that we need to understand is during the period mid-90s to first part of the 21st century, Myanmar, for 20 years, we had an issue with the Myanmar authorities, and where Myanmar became a sanctuary for Indian insurgent organizations to take shelter and to use Myanmar territory to operate against us. Secondly, you find that in mid-80s or early 80s, a large number of Indian insurgents traveled to China through the Myanmar territory. For example, the Naga leadership or the Mizo leadership traveled to China. So that was at the time when influence in areas away were rather nebulous. It didn't have control, but yes, they knew what was happening. And most of these groups would not have been able to reach Yunnan province without some kind of a connivance or convenience given by the authorities. The second one, which means that Myanmar army closed its eyes to any kind of trans-border smuggling that was taking place. Weapons were being smuggled for the use of Indian insurgents in that area in the northeast. Drugs were being smuggled going from Myanmar to towards Pakistan and Afghanistan, and there was a reverse flow from Afghanistan into Myanmar and onward. So that was that two-way traffic taking place, and India was in the middle. And fourthly, the when Pakistan became active in Myanmar during late 1990s, it began to use its influence to carry out espionage and other activities in India northeast. It happened in Bangladesh also, as you'll see from right from 1975 to 1996 for 21 years. Anti-India regimes in Bangladesh had only one program, anti-India program. That was one of them was to give sanctuaries to the Indian insurgents. So these are the areas. So traditionally, you find neither India has any territorial problems with Myanmar, and we don't have any territorial problems with Bangladesh that is solved within the currency of this NDA government and its predecessor. And I think India does not have any, military objectives in these countries, and India only wants peace on its borders with these two. So traditionally, or the traditional security factors, there is not much by way of direct military threats or confrontation. Yes, support to Indian insurgents, giving money, then supplying weapons, and allowing transportation of drugs. And quite lately, there has been a lot of traffic of human trafficking between Bangladesh and India, Myanmar and India for uh, uh, human trafficking taking its origin. So if the human trafficking originates in Bangladesh and enters in India, there are a lot of linkages that need to be seen. But yes, there are. I think the non-security threats are much more today, and that is something that outweighs the conventional threat. However, I must tell you one thing: the India's security forces, India's intelligence agencies, and the military have over the last 70 years developed a very, very strong mechanism to deal with insurgency in the Northeast. I think there is no other country in the world today that can match our experience and expertise in dealing with insurgency. After all, insurgency is one journey which people take. Then you have militancy in several states of India, the left-wing extremism. Then you have militancy as you the establishment has a substantial experience in dealing with this, and it's all in what we call as troop to ground ratio. We have done very well. Why? Because we have followed many strategies, and one important thing is that we have never used our aerial assets or higher weapons against our own insurgents. Despite this, I think uh, I have always recommended that people who are dealing with insurgency, militancy, extremism, political violence, terrorism should study the Indian model. I think the model itself is a great force multiplier or game changer for us. And now since technology is now becoming part and parcel of our counterinsurgency operations, I think the Indian agencies are in a much better position today than what they were about 50 years ago. But yes, the experience is rich. We are able to share our experience with most of our neighbors.
Okay, sir. Speaking of contemporary developments, what is happening? What we tend to observe is that we can see classic realism at play, because on one hand you can see the Myanmar military's concerns with China. On the other hand, you can see India forging strategic partnership with the United States. In such a scenario, how do you think India should be able to deal with the unfolding eventualities?
Like I mentioned earlier, our fundamentals in Myanmar are very strong. We have come a long way since the mid 90s, and we are today in a position to look after our own interests in Myanmar. Like if you have read my article, which has appeared today in the Century, India Century, I've said for the first time we have noticed crowds of protesters outside the Chinese embassy in Yangon. There is a lot of anti-China, sentiment in the country. People are now writing Chinese go back. So vis-a-vis that, I think there's one scenario that we need to look at. The other one is, I don't think that India needs to really worry about what's going to happen. These are early days of a coup, and will take time, next couple of weeks. Let us see how it all plays out. But at this point of time, I think India has taken a very balanced view of the developments, both statements emanating from our external affairs ministry as well as in the UN. I think India has taken a balanced stand. I think India's credentials are so good that we need not worry. We should continue to do what we have, because after all, our national interests and national objectives remain clear. The military is in power, and whatever we are doing today, you will find 80% of India's development assistance is going towards the welfare of the people of Myanmar. So to an extent, I think India has done well, and I think we need to build on this. And like I said, there are many more areas where India has an advantage, and we need to uh, get mileage out of these and take it ahead. But one thing I'd like to say that we should not be intimidated by Chinese presence. We are not here for competition. We will collaborate with the local government, but ensure what are India's interests, what are India's objectives, and how these can be reflected with the opposite side. After all, we are not today condemning them for what they have done. Yes, the military coup itself was something that needed to people have not come to still to understand why it all happened.
Thank you, sir. Before we conclude the interview, there is, I think, this one last question. I think this is
what was behind the question on man, or what went wrong and it happened. So that's where the thing is. I think anywhere else in Nepal, people realize that India is a much better partner with its democratic credentials than somebody else. So I don't think. See, the one thing which you also need to say that today the West is muted in its criticisms. The West also does not have a clearer view of what is happening in Myanmar, because the only country with the traditional democratic credentials is in India, we understand. And we have seen it right from the time of independence, what our relationship is, how it has gone through. And there are only two issues that need to be kept in mind when you deal with Myanmar. What is the Rohingya problem? And why this problem has become so larger than life, and how do we deal with this? And the other one is the peace process with the ethnic minorities. Both are emotive issues. Rohingyas are disenfranchised. They don't have constitutional rights to the extent everybody else enjoys in that country. So there has to be implementation, and that has to be done by the authorities in Myanmar and the international community. I think, in my view, has to provide the ambience for it. The military will be happy to be punished. It has survived in office. It will continue to survive in office. It is countries like us that will need to bear the burden of the sanctions which are placed on Myanmar. So we'll have to see how it goes. So I think the next couple of weeks are going to be interesting. And let's see how they play out. But I think India must be having its plans ready engaging with DP, and let's look. So that's where we are.
Thank you, sir. Before we conclude, there's one last question. I think this question elicited. Audible, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, before we conclude this interview, there is one last question I would like to pose to you, sir. I think this is also one question that elicits much interest in the geopolitical and strategic observers, which we find occasionally reports emanating that China intends to use the Coco Island from Myanmar for intelligence gathering purposes. Your take on that, please, sir?
Well, I think Coco Island has always been in the news, maybe for good reasons or wrong reasons. The information that was available to us that there was no Chinese presence on the island, and the Burmese were using it for their own military purpose. Some people say it was a penitentiary, it was a prison. Some people say it had listening posts, and we don't know whether Chinese are there or not. They may not be. Because I think the Burmese authorities also quite wary of doing something that might, bite them in the back. But however, they also realize that Coco Islands are not very far from or Andaman chain of islands, and any move in that direction could be, or maybe, or will be misconstrued by India. And very soon, if what I understand is that if our plans to develop Andaman Islands commercially, militarily as a strategic thing, Coco Islands will possibly lose its halo that it has with Wales today. So that's where it is. So I think what we're saying is that we need to consolidate what we are doing. We need to be mindful of what the Chinese are doing. We don't need to compete with them. India has got its own strengths in Myanmar, and those strengths are something that we need to, add more to it so that our relationship continues to be strong. I think India has a lot to contribute to Myanmar now and in the future as well.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we have come to the conclusion of the interview. First of all, we would like to thank you for patiently taking all our questions. Much was discussed, starting from the fundamentals, the history of how the coup happened, and talking about the equations of China-Myanmar equations, the concerns with Myanmar, and we also spoke about the equations between India and the Myanmar. We also brought about infrastructure projects, the security aspects, both the traditional and non-traditional security aspects of India's northeast, and the strategic calculus at play, and everything was very beautifully brought out by you, sir. Thank you very much for taking time out to be with us. And we look forward to having more such interviews with you, sir. Once again, thank you very much from C3S, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pallav. Happy to be part of your program, and we hope to collaborate further as we go along. Thanks very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, sir.